Thomas Pelham-Holles, 1st Duke of Newcastle-upon-Tyne and 1st Duke of Newcastle-under-Lyne. KGPC was a British Whig statesman, whose official life extended throughout the Whig supremacy of the 18th century. He is commonly known as the Duke of Newcastle, a protégé of Sir Robert Walpole. He served under him for more than 20 years, until 1742. He held power with his brother, Henry Pelham, until 1754. He had at this point served as a Secretary of State continuously for 30 years, dominating British foreign policy. After Henry's death, the Duke held his late brother's position for 6 years, in 2 separate periods. While his first premiership was not particularly notable, Newcastle precipitated the 7 Years' War, which would cause his resignation from his high position. After his second term as Prime Minister, he served for a short while in Lord Rockingham's ministry, before retiring from government. Few politicians in British history matched his skills and industry in using patronage to maintain power over long stretches of time. He was most effective, however, as a deputy to a leader of greater ability, such as Walpole, his brother, or Pitt. Historian Harry Dickinson says that he became notorious for his fussiness and fretfulness, his petty jealousies, his reluctance to accept responsibility for his actions, and his inability to pursue any political objective to his own satisfaction or to the nation's profit. Many modern historians have depicted him as the epitome of unredeemed mediocrity and as a veritable buffoon in office. Early life. Thomas Pelham was born in London on 21 July 1693, the eldest son of Thomas Pelham, 1st Baron Pelham, by his second wife, the former Lady Grace Holles, youngest sister of the John Holles, 1st Duke of Newcastle-upon-Tyne. He studied at Westminster School and was admitted a fellow commoner at Clare College, Cambridge in 1710. Pelham's uncle died in 1711, and his father the next year, both leaving the large estates to the nephew and son. When he came of age in 1714, Lord Pelham was one of the greatest landowners in the kingdom, enjoying enormous patronage in the county of Sussex. One stipulation of his uncle's will was that his nephew add Holles to his name, which he faithfully did, thereafter styling himself as Thomas Pelham-Holles. A long-standing legal dispute over the estate with his aunt was finally settled in 1714. He increasingly identified with Whig politics, like his father and uncle, but whereas they had been moderate in their views, he grew increasingly more partisan and militant in his views. Britain at the time was very divided between Whigs who favoured the succession of George of Hanover after Queen Anne's death and Tories who supported the return of the Jacobite James Stuart, known later as the Old Pretender. This issue dominated British politics during the last few years of Queen Anne's reign, leading up to her death in 1714, and had a profound impact on the future career of the young Duke of Newcastle. He joined the Hanover Club and the Cat Club, both leading centres of Whig thinking and organisation. Newcastle House in London became his premier residence. Early political career. Newcastle vigorously sustained the Whigs at Queen Anne's death, and had much influence in making the Londoners accept King George I, even organising so-called Newcastle mobs to fight with rival Jacobites in the street. His services were too great to be neglected by the new Hanoverian king, and in 1714 he was created Earl of Clare, and in 1715 Duke of Newcastle-upon-Tyne, 2 titles previously held by his late uncle John Holles. He also became Lord Lieutenant of the counties of Middlesex and Nottingham and a Knight of the Garter. In his new position he was in charge of suppressing Jacobitism in the counties under his control. In Middlesex he arrested and questioned 800 people, and then drew up a voluntary defence association to defend the county. During 1715 he became involved in a riot that ended with 2 men being killed, and Newcastle fleeing along rooftops. The succession of George I was secured in late 1715 by the defeat of a Jacobite army at the Battle of Preston and the subsequent flight of the Old Pretender. The victory of the Hanoverians over the Jacobites marked the beginning of the Whig ascendancy, which lasted for much of the 18th century. Because the Tory opposition had been tainted, in the eyes of George I, by the support of the Jacobite pretenders, he did not trust them, and drew all his ministers and officials from the Whig faction. Following the victory, the Whigs split, with one group forming the government for George I, while the other dissident Whigs became the effective opposition in Parliament. After a period of political manoeuvring, during which time he was for a while associated with a Whig faction led by James Stanhope, from 1720 Newcastle began to identify strongly with the government Whigs, who had quickly come to be dominated by Sir Robert Walpole. Walpole gladly welcomed the young Newcastle into his coterie, firstly because he believed he could easily control him, and secondly because it would strengthen his hand against the rival Whig factions. Newcastle joined with Walpole because he, correctly, believed that he was going to dominate British politics for a generation. From 1721 Walpole began to serve as Britain's first official Prime Minister, a position he would hold for the next 21 years. He was related to Walpole's leading ally Charles Townshend, strengthening his bond with the leader of the new administration. On the 2nd of April 1717 he increased his Whig connections by marrying Lady Henrietta Godolphin, the granddaughter of the Duke of Marlborough, a national hero following his victories in the recent European war and considered a Whig icon. Lord Chamberlain. In 1717, at the age of 23, Newcastle first attained high political office as Lord Chamberlain of the household, and was given the responsibility of overseeing theatres. Plays at the time were often extremely political, and Newcastle was tasked with suppressing any plays or playwrights believed to be too critical of the Hanoverian succession of the Whig government. During this time Newcastle clashed repeatedly with Sir Richard Steele, a leading playwright. In 1719 he was one of the 3 main investors in George Frederick Handel's new opera company, the Royal Academy of Music. The Duke ordered Handel in May 1719 to go to the Continent and contract singers for as long as possible. He held the post for 7 years, and performed well enough to be considered for further promotion. Despite his youth, he had demonstrated his strength in several general elections when he had been able to get as many as 20 MPs elected to seats he controlled. Through his family's wealth and political patronage, he survived in the office during the turmoil in the Whig party between 1717 and 1721, and his switch of allegiance to Walpole secured his position. Thereafter, Walpole had overseen a brief end to the rift between the Whig factions, following the collapse of the South Sea Company, which had left thousands ruined. Newcastle himself had lost £4,000 he had invested when the South Sea bubble was at its height. Following this, Walpole was seen as the only man to steady both the country and the Whig party, and was granted unprecedented powers, effectively making him the first Prime Minister of Great Britain. During his time in the office, Newcastle and his wife had become famous for throwing lavish parties, which were attended by much of London society, including many of his political opponents. He was also prodigiously fond of hunting, and often went down to Bishopston, one of his Sussex properties, expressly for this purpose. During his time as Lord Chamberlain, he oversaw a major overhaul of public buildings, many of which had fallen into very poor repair.